Good morning, everybody, and thanks again for joining us for our second event in our Back to Business speaker series. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that the Hunter Business Chamber operates across the traditional lands of the Awabakal and Worimi people and pay our respects to elders past and present and also future knowledge holders. And I'd also extend a warm welcome to any Indigenous people who are joining us online today. My name's Bob Laws. I'm the CEO of the Hunter Business Chamber, and on behalf of the Chamber, really appreciate your support for this series, and hopefully everyone's getting something out of it. This series is designed to provide information and tips meeting the business challenges associated with COVID-19, and we've shaped this series in response to feedback from members on what their priorities are right now. Today's topic is a very valuable one, and it also addresses some potentially difficult battles for people in business. It's about weighing up your business prospects, and as part of that discussion, we'll be talking about understanding your business survival prospects and taking steps to minimise your financial risk. So, a delicate topic indeed, but a very important one. We'll also talk about what happens if you take a strategic decision to close the business, the processes involved and the steps you can take to make sure that you protect your assets, but also the options you may have to avoid that outcome. So it's not only important for people in personal business, but I'm sure we all know other people who are in dire positions that are seeking advice. To help us wade through that all, I'd like to welcome our expert speakers today, and I think Natalie's finally joined us. So first of all, Natalie Mitchell. Natalie is the Director of Capital Office Business Solutions, a business management consultancy. Natalie is also a board member of both Business New South Wales and the Hunter Business Chamber. Hello, Natalie.
Hi.
Natalie has been kept very busy since COVID-19 began, working with clients on business planning and restructuring, helping them to respond to the changed business conditions that we're all experiencing. Our other guest speaker is Lloyd Kerr, a partner with Jirsch Sutherland based here in Newcastle. Hello and welcome, Lloyd.
Hello, Bob.
Jirsch Sutherland is a specialist insolvency and business recovery practice, offering expert insolvency and turnaround management services. I'm also joined today again by Amy Delore, from the Hunter Business Chamber, our Policy and Public Affairs Manager, who will assist me in facilitating the discussion and your questions today. And behind the scenes, Jack Antcliffe, thanks again from Oasis Media, making sure that I don't have to get too close to dealing with the technology. Amy, I'll be keeping an eye out on questions in the chat panel, and we once again welcome your involvement, whether it's questions or comments. Please feel free to use the chat, and we'll try and engage those with the discussion as we move along. If you'd like to leave your camera on, that's fine, but if you're going to move around, please respect that might be a distraction to others. You might need to turn your video off if that occurs. Also, a note, we do record these sessions, however, we only record the speaker view, so only our guest speakers and facilitators will appear on the playback video, and we'll distribute that recording after the event. So thanks again for joining us. I'm now going to pass over to Amy to get today's discussion underway. Over to you, Amy.
Thanks, Bob, and welcome to our speakers and audience. So we'll get straight into it today. Natalie, I'll start with you. I believe that through your business, you've assisted 44 different businesses with adjusting to JobKeeper and the changed business environment in recent months. What's the level of confidence among small businesses that you deal with in the wake of last week's announcement about the JobKeeper extension? Do most feel confident to move forward, or are they concerned about the lower subsidies and the prospect that the support will be progressively phased out?
Thanks, Amy, and good morning, everyone. Look, certainly I think that the announcements to extend JobKeeper have been welcomed by business. There are quite a lot of businesses relying on the JobKeeper wage subsidy payments at the moment. I believe that the statistics are that they are supporting some 3.5 million employees at the moment. So it's certainly a critical part of the stimulus package in helping businesses move forward. Certainly, as you said, Amy, there is some concern about the new eligibility criteria. As we discussed last week, the new eligibility criteria is based on your actual turnover, and it's based on June, September and December quarters. And there is some need to continue to meet that eligibility criteria moving forward. So certainly there is some concern that businesses might not quite scrape in to continue to receive that benefit. And one of the things that we're going to talk about today is certainly what business owners need to be thinking about right now in terms of planning for the cash flow effects of not having access to that any further. And I think that certainly is a concern for business owners, and it certainly should be something that they are planning for right now.
Lloyd, you commented to me the other day that though we might have avoided that dreaded fiscal cliff, we're perhaps heading down a ski slope instead, and it might be one of those tricky ones where there's a black diamond run around the corner. Do you feel that businesses are coming into a danger period now, and what makes you say that?
It's not so much that businesses are coming into a danger period, they're already in it. When we were talking, we couldn't work out whether it was going to be a beginner's ski slope or black diamond. And nobody can really, hand on heart, tell you what's going to happen, because it's going to be different for every region, every industry, every individual business. But as for what people need to be looking at, Natalie's already mentioned it, it's cash flow. If you've got cash flow, you can survive. If you don't have cash flow, you won't survive. At the moment, the ATO and the banks are being incredibly nice. In 30 years, I've never seen them be this nice. It's not going to continue. The ATO aren't chasing anybody. There's a lot of debt out there. The government is spending an absolute fortune. At some point, the ATO is going to have to start collecting the money to give back to the government. As to the unpredictability of it, could you imagine how some of us would be feeling now if Bateman's Bay had happened in the Hunter? Just getting back on your feet, people are coming to town, starting to spend money, bang, COVID outbreak. So those sort of uncertainties are the things that we can only plan for to a certain extent.
Okay, well, let's look at the matter of assessing your business survival prospects. Natalie, if you had a business come and see you that had been relying heavily on JobKeeper, what steps would you be advising them to take in terms of looking at their business viability at the moment?
Okay, well, thank you, Amy. I get a lot of businesses certainly that I talk to about their current position, and it's not necessarily just that they've been relying on JobKeeper, just the uncertainty, as Lloyd was talking about, in the economic environment that businesses are working in at the moment. Business owners are understandably concerned, and they aren't really quite sure where to turn or what steps they do need to be taking now to prepare their business for a resilience down the track. So one of the things, or what I always do when I start to talk to a business owner for the first time, is we go through and assess where the business is right now, because you can't plan for where you want to get to and how you're going to get there unless you understand where the business is at right now. So could we bring up one of those slides? Do you mind?
Certainly.
Thank you. Oh, hang on, now I've got my, I need to move my pictures. Bear with me a moment. There we go. Now I can see. Wonderful. So what I would say to business owners is let's understand where you're at. Now, different business consultants categorize these different statuses of companies in different ways, but these are just the words I've chosen to use today. So essentially you are in either crisis management, you're in a period of stabilisation, or you're in a period of opportunistic growth. So a lot of businesses at the moment are obviously in crisis management, or they're in stabilisation. So crisis management is generally defined by, are you actually struggling to stay open? Are you struggling to pay your debts as and when they fall due? And that would certainly be terminology that Lloyd would be familiar with, because that's terminology that tends to indicate that businesses might be operating from an insolvent point of view, but there are some legislative changes to protect directors at the moment around that. So if you can't see a way forward, if you are struggling to pay your debts and you're not sure how you're going to get money in and you're still going to be around, then you're absolutely in crisis management. And once you identify that you're in crisis management, then we need to take the next steps as to what is it that we can do? What else should we be looking at if we're in crisis management? And we can talk about that on the next slide. If you're in stabilisation, you are potentially still struggling, but you are not in a position where you've got an immediate cash flow crisis. So you have a bit of a plan and you can see the way forward. You might be still developing that strategic plan. You might be trying to understand what the next 6, 12, 18 months looks like. But you've certainly started discussions with people that can provide you with some support, and you've initiated discussions with your key stakeholders. I see business owners a lot that, they want to bury their head in the sand. It's all too hard. They're too scared to have a conversation with their key stakeholders, with their financial suppliers, with their actual product suppliers, with various customers, etc. And I get it. It's a really scary position to be in. And what happens if I pick up the phone and I can't resolve these issues? What if the answers that I get aren't the answers that I'm looking for? But that stabilisation process is where you've got some support from a consultant or someone that can offer you some advice, and you've started to have these conversations and you have a bit of a plan and a way forward. Most businesses, I predict, are going to be in that crisis management or that stabilisation phase for some period to come. There are businesses at the moment that are in a growth phase because they might be in an industry that is in demand at the moment, and there are a number of industries that are in demand at the moment. So that growth phase, whilst not many businesses are in it, is where you've reached a point where growth is not going to cripple you. And what I mean by that is that businesses that I've come across can make a mistake of saying, here's a new opportunity, here's a new way that we can sell our product or service, let's go for it, without truly understanding what the cost structures and the framework is around how they provide those products and services. So, and you've probably all heard the analogy that sometimes a business growing and making more money can actually be the catalyst to cripple that business because it exponentially increases the cost. And if they're not making a profit on that increased revenue, then they're actually exacerbating the underlying problem. So growth is where you've reached a point where the increased revenue will not cripple you, and you've identified opportunities and you're ready to take advantage of them. And I hope more businesses do get to that point over the next 6, 12, 18 months. But as I said, I think most businesses are going to be in that crisis management stabilisation phase. And then we need to talk about, once you're in that phase, what do we do about it? So Amy, that next slide is exactly around what we do about it. The immediate issues that you would need to have a look at in crisis management. Sorry, Amy, were you talking just then?
No, sorry, go on. Yeah, I was just going to say, yes, if you could go to the matter of sort of financial risks, of identifying them, and then, leading to what you can do to mitigate them as well.
What do we do now? Yep, absolutely. Yep. So crisis management. A lot of businesses are in crisis management right now. What are the things that I would be talking to business owners that came to me for assistance? I would be talking about cash flow. The immediate issue that we would identify is an imbalance. You don't have enough money coming in compared to what needs to go out. So what are the immediate solutions in terms of short-term funding? What are the likelihood of debtors defaulting on their payments? What is the security that you have around ensuring that your debtors are going to pay? What conversations are you having with your debtors about understanding when they can pay you? And having a bit of a look at, of course, the costs within your business to try and minimise the cash flow imbalance. Can we talk to our suppliers and our financial institutions and our other lending institutions around deferring those payments that we need to make? And one of the things that and it surprised me when I first started doing management consulting many years ago, but so many businesses don't actually have a visual representation of their cash flow. And I mean something as simple as an Excel spreadsheet. Yes, there's cash flow tools out there and there's fancy different software packages that you can use, but just as something as simple as a cash flow spreadsheet showing you what's coming in, what's going out, and what does the timing look like around that, so you can juggle the inflows and outflows on a spreadsheet visually in front of you and know who you need to call and what conversations you need to have. Other issues, we've seen some statistics that have been released recently around the lack of customers. Of course, we know customer demand is down. So that's going to be industry specific depending on what you're doing, but I would have a conversation with business owners about that, what we can do about it. Is there an opportunity to diversify, to expand our customer base? We're looking at supply chain issues. So Are you unable to get the goods and services that you need through your supply chain to provide the good or service that you provide out to the marketplace? Is that an opportunity for you to consider what we call vertical or horizontal integration? So that means collaborating with your suppliers or with your customers, or God forbid, even with your competitors, to provide a diversified service to perhaps a greater customer base. So there's these conversations that I would be having with business owners to try to expand that thought process from what we've always done is the same thing that we're always going to do, and do that to try and get out of this crisis, to how can we expand our thinking to take advantage of the issues that we're facing ourselves and perhaps solve those problems for someone else. And then, of course, we need to consider of the immediate issues, what are within our control and what are outside of our control, and how do we plan to manage for those things that are outside of our control. And as a part of that crisis management, and certainly Lloyd's going to speak to this a little more, is that viability assessment. Are we actually in a position where this business is going to continue to be viable in the next 3, 6, 18 months? And, you know, I said this on the webinar last week, that it is a strategic decision for a business owner to make to wind up a business. It's just as important to be able to make an informed strategic decision to know when to wind up a business as opposed to when to continue to try and trade out of a crisis management situation. And if the strategic decision needs to be more along the lines of we have to wind this up, then Lloyd's going to talk to what are the personal asset protection measures that we need to consider before we go through that wind up phase so that we can protect ourselves as much as possible. So that's your crisis management, I guess, in a bit of a nutshell, Amy. If we could go over to the next slide, let's talk about stabilisation. So if we've gotten over that immediate crisis point where we just literally don't have cash flow and we've solved that immediate crisis, then let's look at what we need to do to start to build business resilience. And that's going to be your financials, your P&L and your balance sheet. One of the things that I do with business owners as quickly as possible is to look at their financials and say, do these figures accurately reflect the business? Let's go through each item that's being reflected in these financials and understand what they represent. And the conversations that come out of just doing that one action and the cost savings that you can find are quite phenomenal. And then in cost savings, our suppliers, is there an opportunity to consider alternate suppliers, renegotiate rates, look at internal efficiencies, improving our internal efficiencies so we're reducing our cost margin? Is there an opportunity for just-in-time stock ordering? So are we holding too much stock in our warehouse or whatever it might be? And then, of course, automation. How automated can we make the business to streamline our cost management processes? And then, of course, the one thing that businesses that should be doing, that not a lot of them are doing, is your financial budgeting and your forecasting, and then holding yourself to account on a regular basis as to how you're going to that budget and that forecast. The other consideration is risk minimization. So we need to identify the risks in a business, and they can be compliance risks, they can be IT risks, management risks, HR risks, all sorts of different things that the business needs to understand. And we do a bit of scenario planning. And as Lloyd mentioned before, no one's got a crystal ball. We can't really, anyone determine right now what the next 6, 12, 18 months is going to look like economically or politically or medically in this country. But we've certainly got a fair idea so that we can do some scenario planning. And you'd be surprised if you sit down and you say to yourself, okay, this is how my business can operate in this environment. What happens if this occurs? What happens if this occurs? And how are we going to react? And business owners have said to me for many years that I can sleep better at night knowing that I have a plan of reaction for scenarios that I've considered might happen. And finally, Amy, the resource allocation. Getting back to the fundamental reason that we are in business, or the fundamental concept of any business essentially through any industry, is the efficient utilization of the resources that the business has to return the greatest profit the return on the investment in your resources. That's fundamentally the concept of the business. So taking a step back and understanding, gee, that's confronting when you see a big picture of your own head come up in front of you while you're talking, isn't it? I don't know how anyone else would go with that. So now I've forgotten what I was actually saying. I really have.
Natalie, I'll go to Lloyd in a moment and just ask him about, recognising the danger signs and sort of early preventative measures you can take. But just before I do that, I wonder if there, does an example come to mind of a business that you have worked with over this period that's been able to implement some of those measures and advice that you just went through, and perhaps, put themselves in a better position or improve their business viability?
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so 2 examples spring to mind. Civil construction company that I have been working with for a number of years, and primarily they were operating in the residential housing market, so subdivisions for residential housing. Quite a large civil construction company, but were hit fairly heavily when the housing industry had a bit of a downturn over recent times, because they had essentially all their eggs in that one basket. So diversifying the market that they were supplying to, utilising the resources that they have in the business, which is all of the knowledge on how to do the civil construction, all of the physical assets that they had, their purchasing power, their borrowing capacity. These are all resources, IT knowledge that the business has, to expand their service offerings out to commercial, to pipeline, to diversifying the services by utilising those resources in a different way, has allowed them to smooth out that up and down curve that they were experiencing by being completely reliant on the housing market. So that's one example of diversifying services. Another example is a manufacturing company that I've worked with that manufactured doors, or actually manufactured frames for commercial buildings. So your metal door frames for commercial buildings. Found that there were issues when the doors went to be installed into the frames, and they weren't working well together because they were different suppliers, and that was costing them a lot of money and having to go back to site and make adjustments. So what we did was we said, okay, here's an opportunity for us to look at providing both the frame and the door together, and they've now got a very thriving door manufacturing business because we integrated with a supplier of the doors, merged the businesses together, and now they've got a very successful door frame and door supply business. So it's that vertical horizontal integration there that worked really well for them. So that's 2 examples that spring to mind.
Yeah, thanks for that. There's a couple of great examples there of just where people can make, I guess, some tweaks to their business, and it really makes a difference. Lloyd, as a partner in a practice that advises on insolvency, you probably don't see a lot of businesses until, unfortunately, they've reached a stage where closure is unavoidable. But are there steps that can be taken early on to avoid that outcome? What signs should business owners be looking for to indicate that they might need to seek early advice or take preventative actions?
Well, that was rather a cruel introduction, because for 30 years I've been lamenting the fact that people come to me at 1 minute to midnight instead of coming when there's a little bit more time, a little bit more room to actually do something with their business. I suppose the bad joke is we prefer not to be undertakers, we'd rather be trauma surgeons. But frequently, you're right, people come and they say, my problem is I can't pay this bill tomorrow, or I'm in court tomorrow, and it's a last minute panic. The first step that any business needs to undertake to avoid getting to that point is one that Natalie has been pushing through the last few slides. They need to have their records up to date. They need to know what their cash flow is. They need to be able to put it on a piece of paper and say, this is what our position is today. This is what our position is going to be tomorrow, next week, next month. Those cash flows, those keeping your records up to date. When I have somebody that comes in to see me, and they come in and they say, right, here's the financials from the accountant. Here's the management accounts to the end of last month. Here's our cash flow, and this is what we've got coming in. These are our debtors with their collectability. Here are these 5 or 6 pieces of paper I look at that business and I know I'm going to have more chance of doing some good, producing a salvage operation, than the person that comes in and I say to them in simplistic terms, what does your business own and what does it owe? And he ends up scribbling literally on the back of an envelope sometimes and is very vague about it, doesn't know what they owe, has to be prompted. Those are the people that have got themselves into the deepest hole. So if you're looking to avoid that outcome, know what your position is, know what it's going to be. You talk about getting collectability of your debtors, short-term funding. Those are all very, very important and valid steps. Turnover, cash flow, they're king. One thing I will take a little bit of issue with, at the moment, we've got a lot of opportunity to defer. The banks will let you defer your lease payments, your overdraft payments, your business loans, etc. You need to be looking at your business and knowing that when that deferral comes to an end, can I catch up? It's not that you've been given free time, you've been given an opportunity to catch up in September, October, November. If you aren't planning now for your business to be able to meet those deferred payments, taking rent, for example. I was talking to somebody the other day who's got roughly 2 years left on a commercial lease. They've negotiated a quite generous deferral with their landlord. He was looking at his cash flow, sitting down with me, and I asked him why his rental payments at the end of the year and into next year were the same as they had been pre-deferment. He hadn't allowed for the fact that he's going to have to be paying rent plus over that last period of his lease. So cash flow, turnover, beware the deferrals, make sure that your records are accurate and that they actually tell you. I've had so many people come to me over 30 years and say, my gut feel of my business is, and that's fine when it's the business owner and maybe one person and they've got minimal number of transactions. Gut feel will take a business to a certain stage. You go beyond that, unless your bookkeeper, your accountant are some of your best friends, you're going to get yourself into a lot of bother. A shameless plug for myself is one of those steps to take early advice is come and sit down with me for an hour. The number of people that I've seen over the years that they come, they sit down, they work out what their options are, we establish what their current position is, they go away knowing what those options are instead of what somebody down the pub told them is going to be their option. Most of them I never see again. And I'm quite glad for that because that means that they survived and thrived. But at least they go away knowing what those options are. And we'll set out a few options later on today, but nothing beats sitting down for an hour, having to explain your business to someone who doesn't know your business forces you to actually look at your business. And so those are the early advice preventative measures that you need to take.
Thanks for that, Lloyd. That's good advice. So stay on this topic of financial exposure. If you've decided you're in a position where you're concerned about the viability of the business, not necessarily, it may not close, but you have some concerns. What steps can and should business owners take at this stage to protect their assets if they're have those concerns?
Protecting personal assets is a very human response to a business issue or problem. One thing that I'll lead with is the last minute panic of trying to shuffle things to one side, hide them, transfer the family home out of your name into a spouse's name who's not, say, a director in the business. Those last minute actions cause more trouble than they will ever do any good. Apart from the fact that 99% of them are illegal, the creditors that you're dealing with, who may think that you are a genuine, responsible person who's just fallen on hard times, when confronted with a report that says, oh, and the stock went missing, a whole lot of machinery went missing, and the director transferred his interest in his family home to his wife or his brother or something at the last minute, their approach is going to change markedly. Whether you have a business that succeeds or fails, you live in this town. You're going to be seeing and dealing with the people that you're currently seeing and dealing with for the rest of your days. Doing something out of panic is the worst thing that you can possibly do. There are provisions within legislation. Voluntary administration and deed of company arrangement are two classics. There's also the capacity to do very similar things on a smaller scale on an informal basis. So talk to your creditors, get an independent person, be it someone like Natalie or myself, to sit down, look at the plan. It might be that the business is closing. It might be that it's the legal entity is going into liquidation. But it may well be that a similar type of business is going to continue and deal with a lot of the people that has already been dealing with. Do it properly, do it fairly, make sure it's transparent. Voluntary administration and deed of company arrangement are excellent legislation. They've been copied by other countries around the world. Admittedly, we did pretty much copy it from the Canadians and the Kiwis, but it's been refined and it's good legislation. It doesn't really work particularly well with smaller or micro businesses, simply because of the formality and the costs. So those informal arrangements, those liquidate the corporate shell perhaps and come to a working arrangement with the key suppliers and creditors working forward. The reason that I belabor that is if you've got someone who's a plumber, is he going to stop being an expert plumber because his business has gone bust? No, he's not. So he's either going to be working as a one-man band or one-man and an apprentice, or he's going to be working for somebody else. He's still going to be a plumber. He's still going to have those skills. It's the business that goes through a transition, and it may be the company that is closed. It's not the be-all and end-all of that individual. There's also, when you're dealing with larger businesses, safe harbour provisions. But 99% of the businesses that we deal with are 2, 5, 10, 20 employees, limited amount of turnover. You get up into that rarefied air, it becomes a lot more complex, a lot more cost. A lot of the principles of safe harbour are what we've just been talking about. Talk to your creditors, be transparent, know what your position is. So those are the things with the viability of your business. When you're talking purely about asset protection, you should be talking to Natalie, your accountant, your solicitor, and or me at the very beginning of your business. If you're going to end up in a transition now where you're going to have a new business, by all means, look at that position now, because before you go into a business, setting it up so that you know exactly what is exposed and what is not exposed, there's nothing wrong with that. That is transparent, that is fair. Trying to shuffle it 2 days before a company goes into liquidation, that's not a good thing. I've been talking almost exclusively about corporate entities. There's a lot of people out there in partnerships or as sole traders. A lot of the Bankruptcy Act mirrors what we have in the corporate space. Obviously, it's much more personal because it's dealing with the individual rather than the corporate entity. And I keep using the expression corporate entity, but the law says a company is as much a legal person as I am. So that's a differentiation that people have to make, because if you're a sole director in a small company, you think that the company is you and you are the company. The law doesn't think that way. So that's an important point. With the bankruptcies, I talked about voluntary administration for a company. Well, you've got personal insolvency agreement for an individual. It's the same thing. It's working out an arrangement that produces the best possible result for the people in the company and the people that have been dealing with the company. As Natalie said, stakeholders, there's a lot of different types. And sometimes you can come to a result where everybody gets a little bit of pain, but everybody gets a fair amount of pain. And that is something that we need to work towards. I hope I've made something out of my ramblings, Amy.
Yes, a lot of information there. Thanks, Lloyd. Just before we move off this, could you perhaps just walk us through some of the steps that are involved if somebody does have to close their business and they have business debts, their sort of options and what the steps that they'll actually have to go through?
Okay. Again, I'm going to concentrate on companies, corporate entities. Voluntary administration that I was talking about, it's an interim step. It's where an independent expert gets the opportunity to assess the business and at the same time discuss it with the key stakeholders. It also puts on hold any action that might be taken, say, in normal times with the courts or people attempting to take control of assets that might be leased, that sort of thing. Voluntary administration after that initial period leads either to a deed of company arrangement or a liquidation. Deed of company arrangement is just a fancy way of saying a deal between the business and the creditors, the people that are owed money. In order to get a business into a voluntary administration, all it takes is a meeting of directors and a resolution passed that it should happen, and Joe Bloggs should be appointed as the administrator. I mentioned liquidation as one possible outcome from a voluntary administration. Most businesses that go into liquidation are actually done as what's called a creditor's voluntary liquidation. That is, the company can't pay all its debts as and when they fall due, as Natalie mentioned. And it's voluntary because the directors and the shareholders put their hand up and say, we know we can't pay or we won't be able to pay fairly soon. We need to put an independent person in to control this. We need to have an independent method of distributing the assets of that company. The law sets out very, very clearly what the priorities are, i.e. employee entitlements, that's one priority. You've got banks, finance companies, which have specific connections over specific assets, and then everybody else is treated equally. And it's the liquidator's job to A, get in all the assets for the best possible price, which isn't always easy, and then distribute it according to law and fairly. Again, creditors' voluntary liquidation, there's a resolution of the directors, that's followed by a resolution of the shareholders that mimics it, and again, Joe Bloggs is appointed as the liquidator of that company. From that point on, the liquidator works as the administrator does in the best interests of creditors. And by the way, directors and shareholders are quite often the biggest creditors there because they've put all the money in over the years to bankroll that company. They've provided the working capital and now they're left with a big debt. So that's the nuts and bolts of voluntary administration and creditors' voluntary liquidation.
Okay, thanks for that, Lloyd. And I remind people too, if you have any specific questions or comments, please put them on the chat box, and our panel will try to address them for you. Natalie, I wanted to ask you about the importance of mojo, I guess, when you're in that situation where your business may be in the balance and you've got to decide between staying open, perhaps with a changed business model or in challenging conditions, or closing. How important is it to be in the right mindset, and what are the tough questions that you've got to ask yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Look, absolutely critical. I think most business owners wouldn't need to be told that being in the right mindset and having that positive attitude is, they call that a top-down filter, and it absolutely is. So when business management is excited about the opportunities, they're working towards, with a positive attitude, that filters down to staff. It filters down to the way that you communicate with your creditors, with your customers, with everybody that you're talking to in a business environment. Your excitement and your enthusiasm for your own business shines through, and that makes other people excited and confident in your business. So absolutely, it's important. It's important for your own mental health as well. I know that that is a big concern for the public at the moment, for business owners, for employees, and I know that we're doing some webinars down the track on that. So having that right attitude is really good for the communication, the way that you speak, and also for your own mental health. And I do think that business owners can enhance that mojo, as you call it, their attitude to their business, by going through some of these steps that Lloyd and I have spoken about today, not really understanding where the business is at, what your options are, and what you can do, the steps that you can take, if any, to make your business or improve your business, get it back on track and have it heading in the direction that you want it to head in. If you go down that path and you've got a plan, it's amazing the weight that you would feel lifted off your shoulders, and that will then turn towards an improved mojo. So absolutely, it's critical, Amy.
I suppose you both see people who've stayed on and struggled simply because they wanted to avoid what they might see as a shame of failure or defeat. Lloyd, I'll ask you first. Do you think it's important for people to recognise that closing a business can actually be the right decision, and that there's certainly no shame in making a decision if it is the strategic thing to do?
It's very much the case. Over the years, we've joked to an extent that we should have psychiatrist, marriage guidance counsellor, etc., on the back of our business cards, because you're dealing with people's emotions, what's going on in their lives and between their ears. That's one of the reasons that our business has built a relationship with Beyond Blue. We've undergone some training with them. We sponsor them, support them, because we're not just dealing with numbers. Okay, we're insolvency accountants. Numbers are our thing, but we're dealing with people. And the number of times in Newcastle that I walk down the street, or I go to the footy, or I'm in the supermarket picking something up, and somebody speaks to me and I barely recognise them. And I dealt with them 1 year, 3 years before, and they looked terrible. You know, the bags under the eyes, they weren't sleeping, they were either way overweight because they were overeating, or they were skinny as because they weren't eating. And then I see this person and they're bright-eyed, they're healthy, they're cheerful, and they say, oh, it's the best thing I ever did. Took that weight off my shoulders. Now I can get on with it. Now my kids actually recognise me. One guy said to me, you wouldn't believe it, I went for 2 years living on nothing but baked beans. Didn't have the money for anything else. Then he patted himself on the tummy and said, you can see I'm not doing that now. It's not a shame. You had a shot. You gave it your best shot. You can't continue to beat yourself up and just go on because of some nebulous idea that some medieval right is going to throw you into prison or something because your business fell over. That's ridiculous. There are literally thousands of people in the hunter community who've been involved in a business that fell over, and they're getting on with their lives, and they're usually a lot better off than they were in the last 12, 18 months, 2 years of their business's existence.
Mm.
So there is no shame.
Mm. Natalie, is there anything you'd like to add on that point?
Yeah, I will, absolutely. I'll echo Lloyd's sentiments there. It is absolutely, there's no shame. Having a go in business is a step further than anyone that hasn't run a business has taken anyway. So there's no shame in moving forward. It's a very difficult decision to make to close down a business, but I see a lot of situations where businesses are closing down through no fault of their own. And there are absolutely circumstances that are well beyond a business owner's control. We're going through an economic situation at the moment where there are businesses that are failing through absolutely no fault of their own, that no amount of strategic planning or out of the box thinking could have saved that business. So there is no shame in understanding when is the right time to make the decision to close that business down. One thing I will add is also on that point that I made where businesses are failing through no fault of their own. I see a lot of businesses that go down because their customers have gone down. So if they've got customers that are failing and they owe them lots of money, then they can find themselves in a very critical financial situation because their customers' businesses have failed. So I will point out that one of the conversations that I have with business owners is explaining how to take advantage of some new legislation that was introduced a number of years ago. Some people may have heard the term the Personal Property and Securities Act. It's a bit of a fancy term, but it essentially means that business owners have the right now to secure themselves for money that is owed to them and give themselves basically the same rights as the banks would have in the event of an insolvency for people that owe them money. And Lloyd, I'm sure, would agree with that. And there are steps that business owners can take to protect the money that is owed to them right now. So that's a conversation that we would have so businesses don't fail through that no fault of their own when their customers go down. And just two other points, Amy, I would say to businesses that the slides that I went through before outlining all the different steps and analysis that we can undertake, that was obviously a high level and there would be more involved processes, but it's horses for courses. So the appropriate level of analysis that would need to be undertaken is going to be determined by the size and the complexity of the business. So please don't be listening to this webinar and be deterred by that's just too much for me. That's over the top. I don't need to do all of those things. I'm only a very small business. There is a suite of steps that you can undertake to provide for your business at a level that is appropriate for the size of your business. So it doesn't have to be over the top. As Lloyd said, if you wanted to give us a call, we could certainly talk to you about the steps that you would need to take that would be appropriate for your level of business. And the final point, Amy, that I'll make is, and Lloyd's certainly spoken to this as well, is act now. Don't bury your head in the sand. Don't think there's no hope for me. Don't think there's nothing that can be done. You need to have that question answered. If there's nothing that can be done, then make the decision to close the business. If there's something that can be done, let's identify what those items are, what those steps are, and let's look forward to implementing those steps so that you can get past that crisis management phase that I was talking about and move into that stabilisation. But whatever you do, don't do nothing.
Thanks, Natalie. I've just got it. You raised the point, Lloyd, about the different structures within organisations. So some are corporate structures, sole traders and partnerships. I was curious in this time where we're seeing a lot in businesses, some of our members, for example, there's optimists and pessimists. So where you might have some people in a partnership, one half thinks they're going down the gurgler, the other half thinks, no, it's going to stop next week and the sun's going to shine. What tips or advice might you have where, partnership agreements may or may not be in place? Often they're not, and that's an issue in itself. But where they are, how you get to that point of like-mindedness, so that both Natalie and you might have a comment too, Natalie, and you can do your job.
There's nothing better than getting people in a room together with somebody, be it Natalie, myself. Be it, I was going to say their accountant or their lawyer, but that's usually going to be a bit of an issue because then they'll be seen to be taking sides one way or the other. You really need somebody independent. Getting in a room, looking at the facts, asking them to put it down on a single sheet of paper. One of my regular sentences is, can you tell me why tomorrow is going to be better than yesterday? People will struggle with that. The optimist will struggle with that sometimes. They'll just say, oh, well, it will be. We're going to get more work. Or I've even had people say to me, oh, the whole industry's suffering, therefore some other people are going to fall over and we're going to be okay because we'll get their work. They've got to be able to put it down on a piece of paper. They've got to be able to answer those questions that an independent person will put to them. And sometimes they've just got to face facts that if one wants to go on and one wants to get out, they've got to work out some way that that's going to happen. Because it's grossly unfair for the optimist to lock the pessimist in. And pessimists may well have their personal assets on the line in a partnership and say, no, I'm not going to let you get out. I'm going to hang on to you and we're going to continue. So that's grossly unfair. But simple answer, get in a room, talk it out, use an independent expert.
Natalie, would you agree with that?
Absolutely, echo those sentiments, definitely.
Yeah, okay. We did get one through in the chat here, which is about small businesses, you know, that they're in a stage now where their cash reserves for their business are being significantly run down, and that is a real concern at the moment. You know, what level should a business set itself to be considered a going concern when in relation to its volume of trade? I guess looking at some metrics that they could apply for themselves before they reach out for assistance if that's applicable. And you raise a situation too in relation to debtors and creditors, which often your business can be quite fine, but somebody owes you a lot of money and you end up suffering as a consequence. So is there metrics around that of when cash reserves become critical, or is it really a thing about experience and making sure you are getting advice early and often?
So I guess, Lloyd, did you want to go first? Or?
No, please, Natalie.
My point to that, Bob, is really cash reserves become critical when you can't pay your debts as and when they fall due. Is really the bottom line. But it comes down to that cash flow management that I was talking about before. And so many business owners that I come across run their cash flow in their head. They've got an idea of what their bank balance is. They've got a pretty good idea of what money is going to be coming in because customer X and customer Y said they're going to pay me next week. I've got a few bills that I need to pay the following week. I should be right. But really putting that down, as I said before, even just in a simple Excel spreadsheet, both Lloyd and I have got templates that we can help you to implement, and really getting a visual understanding of what that cash flow looks like, because it's preempting when you're going to have a cash flow crisis prior to it happening, so that you can do something about obtaining access to short-term funding now, or having that in reserve for when you might need it, and identifying it in the future rather than trying to be reactionary.
Yeah, Lloyd?
I totally agree with that. I think we're in danger of sounding like a broken record. Cash flow management, cash flow management, cash flow management. That's what it comes down to. And that phrase, ability to pay your debts as and when they fall due. If your cash reserves are depleted, if your debtors have been run down, how are you going to pay your costs going forward? That's what you've got to look at. That's what you've got to answer to yourself. And if you can't have that conversation internally, sit down with somebody external and have that conversation. It may well be that it's salvageable, but you need to know that, not hope that.
Lloyd, just on that point, do you think, you know, people should be not assuming that things are going to get better? Like a lot of people might be sitting on, might see this as an unusual situation that they can't pay their debts and think, look, you know, this is a passing thing. I can manage this situation for a couple of months and then we'll be back to normal. Is that a dangerous mindset at this time?
It's extremely dangerous. if that person that you're mentioning thinks that they can predict what's going to happen, they are smarter than all the economists, all the politicians. Well, I don't know if we go there, but they're smarter than lawyers, accountants. Nobody knows. Doctors don't know. We're in a situation that our parents, our grandparents didn't really see. Our great-grandparents saw a little bit of it with the influenza epidemic around the First World War period and then the Depression. But how do you know? Like I said earlier, if I was a restaurateur in Bateman's Bay, I might well have been thinking, great, school holidays, people are coming to town, the place is starting to wake up. Oh, COVID just down the road. Everybody's shutting down. Nobody wants to come to town. How could you predict that? How can you predict whether you're an engineering business that does 90% of your work with a particular mine and suddenly they have a big cluster in that mine? It's not predictable. You've got to be prepared for the unpredictable. You've got to work on reserves. You've got to work on a worst case scenario. If you're working on blind optimism, then you surely are blind.
Natalie, any closing remarks from that point of view?
Look, completely agree with what Lloyd just said. Absolutely. So we can't predict what's going to happen. We are all in a very turbulent environment, economically, politically, medically at the moment. But I wanted to just emphasise what Lloyd closed his remarks with, is that planning, that scenario planning. I think it's fairly safe to say that we are going to continue to have COVID outbreaks that may shut us down, that may shut our schools down, that may shut various hotspots and metropolitan areas down. Let's make that part of our scenario planning. So we might be okay right now, but what happens if we get another outbreak? What happens if it closes our suppliers down or our customers down or us down? And let's plan around that so we know how we're going to handle it. It's all about that planning and that foresight.
Yeah, thank you. It's reach out early and reach out often by the sound of things, because no one really has the one answer. So, well, ladies and gentlemen, that does bring us virtually to time. So I really want to thank Natalie and Lloyd for their great discussion today. Very absorbing, and at times, although a fairly dour topic and subject matter, extremely important for every business. And as I say, from our members' point of view, that what we are seeing. We're seeing a lot of stress, and we know that there's going to be lots of businesses that won't see it through to the other side. But we'd like the landing for everybody to be as soft as it possibly can. So take that advice, seek advice early, and as I say, seek it often. So if you'd like to contact any of our panellists, I think the details might be up on your screen today, and they'd be happy to help. And I really would like to thank them again, and I'll be sending them a virtual package of gifts for joining us today. So thank you, Lloyd. Thank you, Natalie, and thank you everyone for tuning in and staying tuned. We have more events in this series coming up of the Coping with COVID. So next week we're going to have a session with rolling on really, to have on the panel Dr. Sally Fitzpatrick of Every Mind, who oversees a mental health program called Ahead for Business, which is aimed at small business operators. And we'll also have psychologist Jim Chapman from AusPsych, who does a lot of work through employee assistance programs. So good to know how they operate and what their contacts are. So that'd be very, very valuable, very business specific, and we look forward to you being able to join us. Beyond that, on the screen we have planning a further one of seeking opportunity, and in that case we'll be looking at businesses that have been able to pivot and do some things differently, and as Natalie referred to, perhaps some of the other ways of looking at their business and integrating to come up with ideas to keep that cash flow coming. So that's on Wednesday the 12th of August. And then on the 19th of August we're hoping to stage our first face-to-face event since March. So Anybody out there who would like to come along and hear Marty Adnam out of Square Media, who's been doing some wonderful things locally, is also one of our winners from our awards program last year. Please join us at Noah's on the Beach at 7:30 to 9 a.m. on that day, and there's details on our website and also in now at the chamber that's been circulated. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. I'll sign off now and hope to see you again either virtually or in person very, very soon. Have a good day. Thank you.